Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making the time today to join the webinar. I'm Nicole, and I'll be running today's webinar called Hours of Service and Electronic Logging Devices, What's New? Hours of Service, or HOS rules, have a large impact on the day-to-day operations of drivers and fleets of all sizes. And now that the ELD mandate is in effect, many drivers are concerned with how ELDs will affect HOS rules and regulations. During today's webinar, we're going to talk about hours of service rules and highlight any impact that having an ELD will have on those rules. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to be recording today's webinar and posting the video onto the BigRoad blog. So you can visit the blog at blog.bigroad.com. And here you'll find recaps of all of our previous webinars, as well as information on what's happening in the industry, including new rules, regulation changes, and ELD mandate news. We post new content here twice a week. It's a great source for industry news and a really easy way to keep yourselves up to date. If you submitted questions with your webinar registration, I've done my best to answer them throughout the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the question box located on your GoToWebinar control panel. The question box is located on the lower right side of the window, and at the end of the webinar, I'll open the floor for our Q&A session. During this time, I'll answer all of the questions submitted by you. Now, we do get a lot of questions during a webinar, so I apologize in advance if I'm not able to answer them straight away. But along with the webinar recording, I'm going to post a recap of all of the questions that were asked and provide more detailed answers with links to any relevant content in order to help you out. And then tomorrow, you're going to be sent a follow-up email with a link to the recording and answers to those questions. So feel free, to share this with anyone who might have questions about hours of service as they relate to electronic logging devices. Okay, let's get started. So here's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. First, we'll do a refresher on hours of service regulations, including what they are, why they were put in place, how compliance is tracked, and who enforces the rules. Next, we'll look at the limitations imposed by hours of service regulations, including what they are and how they impact your business. Then we'll go over the impact ELDs have had on hours of service, including some proposed changes to the rules. And from here, we'll talk about some interest groups that are requesting exemptions to hours of service rules, or ELDs, as a result of the HOS rules. Then we'll talk about some of the benefits that ELDs have had on hours of service. And then we'll end the webinar by answering the questions that were submitted before and during the webinar. So we did get a lot of these, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through the content today to just make sure that you're getting the answers that you're looking for. So let's get started with an hours of service refresher just to set the foundation for what we're going to discuss. Hopefully I've included some new information for the HOS experts out there, and for the new to the industry people, this will be a great run through. So what are hours of service? Commercial motor vehicle, or CMV drivers and fleet managers have a lot of responsibility when it comes to ensuring our roads are a safe place. And this is why the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, or FMCSA, a division of the DOT, created those rules. All of the regulations issued by the FMCSA are published in the Federal Register and compiled in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, known as the CFR. You can purchase hard copies of the CFR, but the easiest way to access it is online by visiting the FMCSA website at the address listed on the screen there, so www.fmcsa.gov/regulations. This way you can simply enter in what you're looking for into the search bar, and the information will be served up to you. So hours of service regulations can be found under CFR Part 395, Hours of Service for Drivers. And this rule is broken up into Subpart A, which covers general information, including maximum driving time, records of duty status, supporting documents, out-of-service declarations, and AOBRDs. Subpart B, which is more recent, covers electronic logging devices, or ELDs. So why were hours of service regulations put into place? Well, the main goal of HOS regulations are to prevent accidents caused by driver fatigue. To do this, HOS regulations limit the number of hours a CMV driver can drive their vehicle to work while regulating brakes. So this includes both truck and motor coach and bus drivers. Fatigue is prevented by keeping drivers on a 21 to 24-hour schedule to maintain their natural sleep-wake cycle. HOS regulations govern the working hours of commercial motor vehicle operators in the United States. Canada and Mexico have their own versions of HOS, which will vary from the US HOS regulations. So here's what's tracked when it comes to hours of service. To be compliant, drivers need to track on-duty, not driving time. So this includes time that you're working or required to be ready to work, but you're not driving. It might include waiting to be dispatched from a terminal, time inspecting, fueling, or washing your truck, loading, unloading, or supervising staff, breakdowns or time spent dealing with maintenance issues, or drug tests. On-duty driving time is really straightforward. So this is the time spent driving your vehicle. It tracks breaks, so this can be your 30-minute break or your sleep berth, if applicable, to show that you are not operating your vehicle or doing any non-driving related job tasks, or off-duty time, so you're fully relieved from all of your on-duty work and responsibility of performing tasks for work. So you're free to do what you want, and you can leave the place where your vehicle is parked. So if you're not doing any work, paid or unpaid, for a motor carrier, and you're not doing any paid work for anybody else, you may record the time as off-duty time. So how are hours of service tracked? Drivers who are required to comply with the ELD mandate are required to keep records of their time with an electronic logging device. Traditionally, paper logbooks were kept, and when using a paper log, the driver is responsible for manually recording everything by hand onto the paper logbook, which leaves a lot of room for human error. As technology has advanced, so has the way drivers keep track of their hours of service. Before the ELD mandate, many drivers began using electronic logbooks like the BigRoad mobile app. Electronic logbooks are pre-programmed with rules and regulations, and they have the ability to do calculations and even notify drivers of potential violations and risks, all of which make them the preferred method of logging prior to the ELD mandate. But most recently, as a result of the mandate, most CMV drivers have transitioned to AOBRDs and ELDs. ELDs have been mandated by the government to reduce log falsification, improve accuracy, and prevent fatigued driving. ELDs, like electronic logbook apps, are also pre-programmed with rules and regulations, but they take it one step further by plugging into the ECU, or electronic control unit, of the truck and automatically track movement, leaving very minimal need for information entry by the driver. BigRoad's version of this is our DashLink ELD, which we're going to talk about later. So who enforces hours of service rules? DOT officers in each state are responsible for enforcing hours of service rules during inspections. If a driver is found to be in violation of their hours of service, for example, a driver didn't take their 30-minute break, they can be forced to stop driving for a certain period of time. Despite the transition to electronic logbooks and electronic logging devices, which make it much easier to run in compliance with hours of service, HOS violations remain a common problem for CMV drivers. Although we're now starting to see an improvement, which has been attributed to the implementation of ELDs, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, or CVSA, runs a program called International Road Check every summer. International Road Check is the largest CMV inspection program in the world. In 2017, during this 3-day event, over 62,000 inspections were conducted with 19.4% of vehicles and 4.7% of drivers being placed out of service due to a critical violation. Of those drivers, 32% were placed out of service because of hours of service violations, and 11% were placed out of service for falsifying their logbooks. So this really goes to show the impact that HOS violations are still having on drivers today. And it'll be really interesting to see the results for next year when the majority of CMV drivers inspected will have ELDs installed. As mentioned, hours of service regulations focus on when and how long you can drive by limitation on certain tasks. Now, before I get into the impact of ELDs on hours of service, I want to do a quick refresher to some of those hours of service limitations. For this section, I'm going to focus on property carrying drivers, and we'll talk a little bit about passenger carrying drivers later on. You must follow these maximum duty limits at all times. They are the 14-hour driving window limit, 11-hour driving limit, and 60-hour 7-day and 70-hour 8-day duty limits. And again, these rule sets are pre-programmed into your ELD or electronic logbook app, so you'll just need to select which rule set you follow. We'll start by looking at the 14-hour driving window. You're allowed a period of 14 consecutive hours to drive up to 11 hours after being off duty for 10 or more consecutive hours. So some people think of this as a daily limit, even though it's not really based on a 24-hour period. The 14 consecutive hour driving window starts when you start any kind of work. So driving, unloading, waiting, etc. So at the end of the 14 consecutive hour period, you cannot drive again until you've been off duty for 10 consecutive hours. Your driving limit is in the 14 consecutive hour period, even if you've taken off duty time during those 14 hours. So here's an example. You've had 10 consecutive hours off and you come to work at 5 a.m. You must not drive your truck after 7 p.m. So that's 14 hours from 5 a.m. You can do other work after 7 p.m., but you cannot do more driving until you've had 10 more consecutive hours off. So during the 14 consecutive hour period that we just talked about, you can only drive your truck for up to 11 total hours, which is known as your 11-hour driving limit. However, driving is not permitted if more than 8 hours have passed since the end of the driver's last off-duty or sleeper berth period of at least 30 minutes, known as your 30-minute break requirement. At 11 hours of driving, you must take 10 consecutive hours off duty before you drive again. An example of this is that you've had 10 hours in a row off, so then you come to work at 6 a.m. and drive from 7 a.m. until 2 p.m. So that's 7 hours of driving plus 1 hour of on-duty not driving time. Then you take your 30-minute break because you've worked for 8 hours, and after that you can drive for another 4 hours, which will take you until 6:30 p.m. At this point, you've driven your 11 hours for the day, and you need to take another 10 consecutive hours off duty before you can drive again. When you're using an ELD like BigRoad's DashLink, you'll be able to see how much driving time you have left on your clock and when it's time to take a break. So it really takes the guesswork out of hours of service compliance. Drivers need to follow the 60 or 70-hour limit, which is based on a 7 or 8-day period. This can be referred to as your weekly limit. However, it doesn't have to be based on the standard week, Sunday through Saturday. It's based on your carrier's start of the 24-hour period. So the oldest day's hours drop off at the end of each day when you calculate the total on-duty time for the past 7 or 8 days. For example, if you're operating on the 70-hour 8-day schedule, the current day would be the newest day of your 8-day period. The hours that you worked 9 days ago would drop out of your calculation. Here's an example in the table on the right there. The driver has accumulated a total of 67 on-duty driving and on-duty hours in an 8-day period. If this driver is operating on the 70-hour 8-day rule, then they would be in compliance with hours of service rules. Once the driver reaches the 7-hour mark, they cannot drive again until they have taken enough off-duty hours to operate again. So when the driver reaches the 9th day, or in this chart here, the second Monday, the hours from day 1 or the first Sunday of the cycle will drop off. So the driver would then be calculating their hours for days 2 to 9, so Monday to Monday. You can also take advantage of the 34-hour restart regulation, which essentially allows you to restart your clock, either 60 or 70-hour clock, by taking 34 or more consecutive hours off duty. In some cases, this would allow you to get back on the road sooner. You can take advantage of the rule by taking at least 34 consecutive hours in off-duty sleeper berth or in a combination of both. So an example of how this might work is if you're following the 70-hour 8-day limit and you work 14 hours per day for 5 days in a row, you will have been on duty for 70 hours. You can't drive again until you drop below your 70 hours worked in an 8-day period. However, if your company allows you to use the 34-hour restart, you will have driving time available immediately after 34 consecutive hours off duty. So then you would begin a new 8-day period and have a full 70 hours available. So again, BigRoad's DashLink will do all the thinking for you here. You will see when you've run out of time, and if you take a 34-hour restart, so if you're off duty for 34 hours, you'll see your new hours pop back up. So now that we know a little bit about the rules, we'll talk about the different people that need to comply with them. The majority of CMV drivers need to follow hours of service regulations. In general, a CMV is a vehicle that is used as part of a business, is involved in commerce, and fits any of the descriptions on the screen here. So these include CMVs that weigh 10,001 pounds or more, have a gross vehicle weight rating or gross combination weight rating of 10,001 pounds or more, is designed or used to transport 16 or more passengers, including the driver, not for compensation, or 9 or more passengers, including the driver, for compensation, or it transports hazardous materials in quantity requiring placards. One important difference to be aware of is that there are different rules for passenger versus property carrying drivers. So this chart shows you the high-level difference between the two types. And the key differences are in the number of hours that can be driven, so 10 for passenger or 11 for property, and the number of on-duty hours, which are 15 for passenger and 14 for property. So where you're driving can also impact your regulation compliance requirements. This is a fairly common question. So what's the difference between intrastate and interstate driving? It's important to know which of these you are. I'll give you a high-level overview on it to make it simple. Intrastate commerce is based on where the freight came from and where it's going. If you are transporting goods between two companies within the same state, this is considered intrastate commerce. This type of driving is regulated by the jurisdiction in which the driving happens. Many states follow federal regulations for intrastate regulations, but some states have implemented different regulations. To be sure of your state, please check with the respective government body of the states that you're traveling through. So some states to watch out for are Alaska, which follows a 70-hour 7-day or 80-hour 8-day limit, allowing for 15 hours of drive time after 10 hours off duty. And then Texas and California also have their own set of rules. So when you're hauling interstate, you're likely taking goods between two different states or through another state. Interstate also includes freight that is dropped off or picked up in a place outside the US. This type of driving is federally regulated, so by the FMCSA and the DOT. It's important to note here that if you're a hazmat hauler, the DOT has authority, which is federally regulated, whether you're driving intrastate or intrastate. And another thing to note here is that if you operate in both intrastate and interstate, then you're considered an interstate driver and need to comply with those rules. You can select your state's rule set from inside the BigRoad mobile app when you're running it on its own or with the DashLink ELD to ensure that you're driving in compliance with your state's hours of service rules. The ELD mandate has a substantial impact on hours of service, not on the rules themselves, but for how compliance is tracked. So although a lot of drivers and fleets out there assume that ELDs will change hours of service rules, ELDs have been mandated to enforce and not change the existing hours of service rules. A panel discussion that was held at the American Trucking Association's Management Conference and Exhibition at the end of last year, during which time one of the panelists, Joe DiLorenzo, the Office Compliance and Enforcement Director at the FMCSA, said that the biggest thing to remember is that it really is still about HOS reinforcement, and all we're really doing is moving from paper logs to electronic records. Although the intention of ELDs has not been to alter hours of service rules, because of how rigidly they record a driver's hours of service, they have brought to light some problems that many in the industry have seen with the hours of service rules, which have resulted in some proposed changes to HOS rules and the industry as a whole. So one of the changes proposed is with personal conveyance. The original personal conveyance rules were written over 20 years ago. They essentially state that you must be unladen and not under the direction of a carrier in order to drive your vehicle for personal use. And because of the way the guidance was written, drivers of single-unit commercial motor vehicles that carried loads or work equipment were unable to document this off-duty time. The contents of these vehicles can't be easily unloaded, left unattended, and then loaded back up in order to operate the vehicle for personal use. The ELD mandate brought to light concerns with this section of hours of service rules since all miles, both on duty and off, are recorded using electronic logging devices automatically. So the FMCSA is proposing an adjustment to the rule that focuses on a driver's duty status, so whether they are off duty when using personal conveyance rather than what they are carrying. The revision is intended to eliminate the requirement that the CMV be unladen, therefore ruling out the inconsistent impact that personal conveyance has on drivers of varied vehicle types. The change in guidance would allow drivers to use their truck off-duty. For example, when they are driving to their motel, a truck stop, or to a restaurant from their lodging. Drivers will also be permitted to commute to their personal residence, then back to their last on-duty location. For instance, the driver's terminal, trailer drop-off location, or work site. This change was first announced in December and opened to a 30-day comment period, which was originally set to end on January 18th, 2018, but they've since extended the comment period to February 20th, 2018. ELDs are required to include a duty status option for personal conveyance. This option can be granted to drivers at the discretion of the carrier, but it is not auto-enabled. With BigRoad, this can be done from inside the BigRoad web app in just a few taps. Under the ELD mandate, personal conveyance can be tracked with less precision than on-duty driving time. The accuracy must be within 10 miles when driving in personal conveyance, rather than 1 mile when driving on duty. Drivers must select this status at the beginning and end of the personal conveyance time, and if prompted, they need to annotate their record to detail their activity. Because the use of this feature is up to the carrier's discretion, carriers are advised to have a policy in place regarding personal conveyance and to train their drivers accordingly. And then yard move is a feature that, like personal conveyance, is optional. It needs to be switched on by the carrier in order to be used by the driver, and it's meant for when you need to move small distances in a shipping yard. However, unlike personal conveyance, when you use yard move with an ELD, you must be switched to on-duty driving, so it will affect your hours of service. I mentioned earlier that the rigidity of electronic logging devices has brought to light some difficulties with HOS rules. Because of this, there are a lot of groups requesting exemptions to the ELD mandate from the FMCSA. So there are a number of existing ELD mandate exemptions that were granted right away when the mandate was announced, and these include anyone who is not currently required to keep records of duty status, so short-haul drivers, anyone who is required to keep logs less than 8 days in a moving 30-day period, drive-away, tow-away drivers, and anyone driving a vehicle with an engine model year of 1999 or prior. But here are some ELD mandate exemptions that have come forward post-ELD mandate deadline. The first exemption request is from agriculture and livestock haulers. So CMV drivers in the agricultural industry have an existing hours of service exemption. They're not required to maintain records of duty status if they drive within 150 air miles of the source of their livestock or AG products. The new proposal would expand the exemption to include agricultural haulers operating unladen vehicles within a radius of 150 air miles from the load source and after its delivery. So the exemption would also include AG haulers driving an unloaded truck on their way to pick up a load after they delivered the load and while the truck is loaded and in transit. And in December, to give themselves time to consider this exemption, as well as some other proposed exemptions from different groups, the FMCSA officially issued a 90-day ELD mandate exemption for livestock and AG haulers. According to the waiver, livestock and agriculture haulers have until March 18th, 2018 to switch from paper logs to ELDs. The TRAA, or Towing and Recovering Association of America, has requested a 5-year exemption from the ELD mandate. So this exemption request is for all tow truck drivers when they are providing towing, recovering, and roadside repair services. The group filing the exemption request, the TRAA, represents more than 35,000 towing companies across the United States of America. The Towing and Recovering Association of America highlights in its exemption request that most tow truck drivers work within the short haul exemption. However, they occasionally do not qualify for the short haul exemption for more than 8 days in a 30-day period and therefore have to maintain paper logs for either driving radius or their hours worked. The tow truck drivers group also mentions that their drivers often switch between interstate and intrastate regulations more than once a day. Moreover, throughout their shifts, their drivers also switch between commercial and non-commercial vehicles. In its exemption request, the TRAA says that using ELDs would be putting an undue burden on them, since their drivers would only need to keep logs for a small part of their daily operations. So the FMCSA is seeking comments on this proposed exemption until February 7th, 2018. In November, the Owner-Operator Independent Driving Association, or OIDA, formally requested the FMCSA to extend the ELD deadline for small carriers that do not have a carrier safety rating of unsatisfactory and can document a proven history of safety performance with no attributable at-fault crashes. This rule, they claim, is unrelated to the hours of service rules, as motor carriers and drivers would still be required to keep records of duty status under existing HOS rules. Instead, OIDA points to the following concerns regarding the ELD mandate: a lack of government or independent third-party vetting processes on many of the 150 plus self-certified ELDs that are in the FMCSA's registry, the cost of compliance, and broad concerns about cybersecurity. The FMCSA will accept comments on OIDA's petition until February 1st, 2018. And a few more interest groups that have requested the FMCSA grant them a 5-year exemption. The first is from CES, or CUD Energy Services. So this is a group of drivers that are trained to service oil wells. CES says that certain oil field locations have poor cell service, which would prevent drivers from logging into ELDs. The company also mentions that it does plan to install equipment that would allow tracking of its trucks when communication capabilities exist, but those trucks would not be able to qualify as AOBRDs or ELDs. And then finally, the Association of, another interest group is the Association of Energy Service Companies, AESC. They've requested a 5-year exemption on behalf of well service rig contractors. So these contractors usually qualify for the short haul exemption, but sometimes they exceed that limitation. The group says that without the exemption, these drivers would have to monitor the number of days they exceed the short haul exemption requirement. And the group also argues that the drivers can spend 2 to 5 days parking at a single or parked at a single location and spend very little time on public roads. The AESC mentions that they would continue to maintain paper logs when they're required to. And then finally, the American Disposal Services, or ADS, is requesting the exemption from the ELD mandate and from HOS rules and keeping any record of duty status at all. According to the company, it has more than 300 drivers who operate under the multiple stop rule. And on average, the company drivers have between 800 and 1,200 stops per day on each route. Moreover, they pick up trash every 22 seconds. The drivers also operate the 100 air mile short haul exemption, but they exceed the 12-hour limit for more than 8 days in a 30-day period, which requires them to use compliant ELDs. So the company claims that there's no ELD that can accurately record driving time when the CMV makes constant short movements with the driver often exiting the vehicle. And the FMCSA is seeking comments on all of these exemption requests until February 1st, 2018. So although there was a lot of resistance to ELDs and skepticism on the benefits that they claimed, we've already seen some of these benefits become reality. In the next couple of slides, I'll go over the benefits that we've seen, including notably decreased violations and improved market conditions. So far, 40 states registered improvements in their percentage of clean inspections, according to data released at the end of December 2017, even though the data also showed that roadside inspections went up 4%. CVSA officials noted that HOS compliance has also improved and attributed the improvement to the adoption of ELDs by the majority of carriers. Officials from the Arizona Department of Safety have also reported a drop in Level 3 inspection violations, which is also credited to ELDs, saying that electronic logging devices have eliminated form and manner errors, which is the largest category of HOS violations. So experts believe that with the implementation of the ELD mandate, the industry will see an even further drop in HOS violations. And after the implementation of the ELD mandate, market conditions have begun to favor drivers. We are already seeing a significant rate improvement. Trucking companies are feeling the pressure to increase rates because enforced hours of service rules by ELDs has made it clear that it's difficult for drivers to deliver loads in the time allotted and difficult to earn a decent living with the existing rates when they are forced to work within the hours of service rules. Fleets should be prepared for this increase and remember that if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. So fleets should look at their delivery distances and determine whether a driver can realistically make the delivery time in the 11 hours of allotted driving time, factoring in rest stops, breaks, traffic, weather conditions, and other factors. If carriers have an unrealistic travel time, the ELD mandate will put an end to that, so they'll need to look at revising delivery times and rates to reflect that. Drivers are in a really great position right now to demand fair pay for their services. Some of the rate improvements that studies have shown so far are a 7% increase in load rates and a 13% increase in reefer load rates in Dallas, rising lane rates. For example, in December, Columbus to Buffalo paid an average of 31 cents more per mile. Salt Lake City to Stockton, California paid about 20 cents more per mile. And Denver to Albuquerque saw a 17% increase in December. Transportation economists are suggesting that a 20% increase in spot rates in the foreseeable future is only a conservative estimate and cites ELDs as the driving force behind this rate hike. So we've covered a lot of information, and if you haven't installed an ELD yet, you're vulnerable to violations now and could be put out of service beginning on April 1st, 2018. It's time to choose a solution that meets your operations needs. And you need to think of something, find something that's going to make compliance easy for you without breaking the bank. Which is why I want to talk to you briefly about BigRoad's DashLink ELD, the BigRoad web app, and the BigRoad mobile app. Together, it's the most affordable, reliable, simple, and flexible ELD solution available. The BigRoad mobile app is our electronic logbook and hours of service management application. This was the first product that BigRoad offered to the market, and it was actually one of, if not the first, electronic logbook applications available. The BigRoad mobile app is used to replace paper logs, and it's completely free for you to use. Drivers and fleets love the BigRoad mobile app because it takes the guesswork out of logging and managing your hours of service. It enables you to create clean, inspectable, and error-free logs in just a few taps. So we always hear how much drivers enjoy this app because it makes their jobs easier. They don't need to worry about doing wrong calculations, running over their hours, or getting a violation for something that's easily avoidable with our app. Plus, it's really driver-friendly and easy to use, so you don't need to spend hours learning how it works. It's very intuitive. If you're not using it already, download it and give it a try for free. You can do so by visiting Apple iTunes Store or the Google Play Store from your device and searching for BigRoad. If you or your drivers are already using the BigRoad mobile app, we suggest that you give the BigRoad web app a try. It's a real-time operations management tool that helps administrators better manage their operations while getting on the road to ELD compliance. From the BigRoad web app, you're able to see where all of your assets are on the map and monitor hours of service compliance. You can easily see when you or a driver is at risk for a violation and communicate with real-time messages. You can also use the web app to store all of your logs and documents to have them readily available in the event of an audit. Both the BigRoad web app and our BigRoad mobile app connect to our DashLink ELD. So finally, the solution that everyone should get onto if they need a compliance solution is the DashLink ELD. Our DashLink really is the easiest and most affordable ELD mandate compliance solution that you're going to find on the market today. For a limited time, we're making it even more affordable by giving away 3 extra months free when you purchase it now on a 1-year term paid up front. So that's 15 months for the price of 12. So that means with no upfront hardware costs and a low monthly fee, you can have all the tools that you need to comply with the ELD mandate without worrying about what it's going to cost you. You simply plug the DashLink device into the ECM of a truck, pair it with your BigRoad mobile app via Bluetooth, and you're ready to go. There's no installation from a third party required, and no permanent changes to your truck. The device pulls the information directly from the computer within the truck so you can focus on driving and not logging. So that wraps up our HOS and ELDs What's New webinar. If you have any questions that weren't answered during the webinar, please enter them into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And while we're waiting for those to come in, there's a couple of things that you can take advantage of. If you're interested in learning more about BigRoad solutions, here's some ways that you can. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to give the BigRoad mobile app a try by downloading it in the Apple or Google Play stores. You can You can also go on BigRoad.com to find out how to download that there. And if you're ready to achieve compliance now, we've made it super easy for you to purchase the Dash Link online without even having to speak to a rep. So you can just fill out the form online at www.bigroad.com/buy now or www.getmyeld.com. So if you prefer to speak to somebody over the phone who can place an order for you, you can also call into BigRoad here, and we'll be happy to help you get set up with a rep. Okay, so let's move on to questions. The first question we have is, how does the ELD mandate affect short-haul drivers? So those drivers driving within a 100 air-mile radius of their starting location. So short-haul drivers who never drive further than 100 air miles from their starting location are not required to keep a record of duty status and therefore will not need to use an ELD. However, if you drive outside of the short-haul classification more than 8 times in a 30-day period, you will need to log those days using an ELD. The next question we have is, would you explain how to keep up with the recap hours? So we track your recap hours for you, which you are able to access from the BigRoad mobile app so that you can see when your cycle hours will drop off. If you have further questions about how to use this feature, please reach out to our support team. Their email is on the screen there, support@bigroad.com. So the next question we have is from Pam. Does a 1 to 2 truck company need to have an ELD? So the answer to that one is yes. There is no exemption based on the size of your operation. So if you're currently required to keep logs and don't fall under any of the other exemptions that we went over, then you will need to run an ELD. So a few people are asking questions about log editing with ELDs. So how can you edit your logbook information such as odometer reading, location, and drive time? Unfortunately, under the ELD mandate, you cannot make changes to your logs once they've been recorded. A driver can make annotations to any records that were done in error, but he can't change them. The next question is, how is it possible to have 2 drivers showing driving at the same time in a team vehicle? To set you and another driver up as a team in the same vehicle, you'll need to add each other as co-drivers from inside the BigRoad web app and then ensure that you're signed in under your own login each time that you drive. We do have a team driving guide located in the ELD materials section under the resources tab in our website, and I'll include a link to this in tomorrow's blog post that I'll send you all in the follow-up emails that you'll receive tomorrow. The next question is, what is the cost to get set up? So it really depends on what your needs are and the size of your operation. For 1 to 2 truck operations, the cost is $19.50 a month per truck, or $234 a year. For fleets, it's $25 per month per truck and driver. So you might need to purchase additional licenses if you have additional drivers or administrative staff who need access, and that's $15 per month per license. We're also offering a promotion right now for a limited time that will give you 3 months of free service if you purchase on a 1-year term paid up front. So that's 15 months for the price of 12. I have a question asking if the slider recording will be available. So yes, I have recorded this webinar and we're going to be posting it on the BigRoad blog tomorrow. And I'll send you all a link to that blog so that you can either share the recording or rewatch it. And you'll get that in an email tomorrow. Okay, so it looks like that's it for questions for today. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.